Look, over here, the deceased is actually wearing the pharaonic crown of Upper Egypt. That means this person was probably in the royal family. I'm going to say this is probably a priestess of Isis.
What if the most valuable treasure in a room looked like junk? Over the years, people have walked into pawn stars carrying rusted helmets, ancient Egyptian relics, royal burial artifacts, and historical objects they barely understood themselves. Some turned out to be worth fortunes. Others were exposed as clever fakes.
All right, you want 30 for it? I'll do 30 right now.
Right now.
Right now. That's it. Ready?
I know I paid a little bit more than what Phineas said this is worth, but I think it will really up the pawn shop's art game. And
Along the way, the show revealed something most people never learn about the world of collecting. Age alone does not create value. Authenticity, rarity, provenance, and historical significance are what separate ordinary objects from extraordinary discoveries. Tonight, we'll count down 7 extraordinary royal and historical artifacts, from forgotten battlefield relics to royal treasures, and uncover the stories that made them unforgettable. Let's dive in. Number 7. Anglo-Saxon Spangenhelm Helmet. In Season 17 of Pawn Stars, a man named Kevin walked out into the gold and silver, carrying what he described with complete confidence as an old football helmet from the 1800s.
I got a football helmet signed by 28 Heisman Trophy winners.
I'll do $14.50. That's the best I'm gonna do.
All right, let's do it.
All right, $14.50. We got a deal?
He had found it at an estate sale, paid almost nothing for it, and was hoping to walk out with $750. When he set it down on the counter in front of Chumley, what they were both looking at was a rust-covered, bowl-shaped piece of corroded metal, the kind of object most people encounter at estate sales and walk past without pausing, the kind of thing that ends up in a dumpster during home cleanouts because it looks like junk and weighs too much to keep around without a reason. Chumley recognized immediately that the shape, construction, and proportions were unlike anything American, unlike anything from the industrial era, and unlike anything he had encountered in years behind the counter. He called in Bob Dodge, founder of the Artemis Testing Lab and one of the most respected antiquities authenticators operating in the United States. Dodge walked in, studied the piece for no more than a few seconds, and delivered a verdict that changed the entire atmosphere of the room. What Kevin had purchased at a random estate sale was an authentic Anglo-Saxon Spangenhelm, a battlefield combat helmet forged between the 6th and 8th centuries of the Common Era. 1,400 years old, more than 700 years older than the United States itself. The Spangenhelm was the premier battlefield helmet of the early medieval world, worn by warriors across Anglo-Saxon England, Viking Scandinavia, and the Germanic kingdoms whose political conflicts directly shaped the map of modern Europe. The finest versions, reserved for kings and elite commanders, were forged entirely from iron and carbon steel. Dodge confirmed through an XRF analyzer, a device that fires X-rays at metal to determine its precise elemental composition, that Kevin's helmet was solid carbon steel, placing it in the category worn by the highest-ranking fighters of the Anglo-Saxon world. His valuation came in between $12,000 and $15,000. Kevin had walked in expecting $750. The deal closed at $10,000, more than 13 times what Kevin had come in hoping to receive. A 1-in-a-million survival from the Age of Kings, found at an estate sale and nearly thrown away. Number 6. Ancient Egyptian Scarab Ring. There is a lesson that the world of high-value collecting teaches consistently and that catches sellers off guard more reliably than almost any other principle in the market. Age alone is not value. Value is age combined with rarity. The two are not the same thing. They do not always travel together, and confusing one for the other is one of the most expensive mistakes a seller can make when walking into any serious buying environment. No transaction in the entire run of Pawn Stars delivers that lesson with more clarity or more emotional impact than what happened in Season 14, when a seller walked in carrying a gold ring she genuinely believed was worth $15,000.
I have here an Egyptian scarab ring.
I'll tell you what, I will give you $360.
All right, I'll take it.
We got a deal then.
We got
All
a
right.
deal.
She had inherited it from her world-traveling stepmother. The family story was consistent and confident. A royal inscription, an ancient Egyptian origin, a direct connection to the golden era of one of the most powerful empires in human history. Rick called in an antiquities specialist who identified 4 hieroglyphic symbols on the ring's face: a sun, a rake, a scarab, and an ibis, and translated their combined meaning with complete certainty. The combination placed the ring squarely within the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, the Golden Age, the era of Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, Thutmose III, and Hatshepsut. The ring was genuine. It was 3,000 years old. It was produced in the workshops of an empire at the absolute peak of its wealth and power. And then the expert explained the problem. The scarab was not an exclusively royal symbol. It was a religious symbol available to every level of Egyptian society, from the pharaoh on his throne to the most ordinary laborer working the Nile. Because the Egyptian empire lasted more than 3,000 years, and the scarab was produced universally throughout, millions of authentic scarab pieces entered the world. Genuine 18th dynasty scarab rings appear at auction today for a few $100s, because supply has never come close to being exhausted by demand. The expert's valuation, $450 to $500. The seller had walked in expecting $15,000. They settled at $360, one of the most visibly deflating departures in the show's history. Authentic, ancient, not rare. In the world of serious collecting, rare is the only number that moves the market. Number 5. Fake pharaoh carving. Not every ancient-looking object that walks through the gold and silver's doors is what it claims to be. And no episode in Pawn Stars history makes that point more sharply or more entertainingly than the season that brought in a framed piece of carved sandstone presented with complete seller confidence as an authentic Old Kingdom carving of a pharaoh worth approximately $25,000. The Old Kingdom is the age of pyramid building, spanning roughly 2700 to 200 BCE. If the carving had been genuine, it would have been older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The seller's story was that an archaeologist friend had personally examined the piece and confirmed its authenticity. He was asking $25,000, and he had no visible doubt that the number was fair. Rick Harrison was skeptical from the first moment he looked at the stone. He noticed immediately that the wear patterns on the surface looked wrong. Too even, too deliberate, too consistent across the entire face of the carving. When an object spends 4,000 years in the ground, it develops a very specific type of erosion. Inconsistent, unpredictable, shaped by the micro-environments it encountered over the millennia. Genuine ancient erosion does not look uniform because the conditions that produce it are never uniform. On this sandstone looked like someone had worked hard to make it appear old rather than something that had actually become old through time. He called in Bob Dodge, who examined the piece methodically and confirmed Rick's instincts about the texture and surface composition. The stone was too soft. Its surface erosion pattern did not match what legitimate Old Kingdom artifacts display under close examination. But the definitive moment came when Dodge studied the crown carved into the pharaoh figure's head. The style of the headdress, Dodge explained with complete professional certainty, had never existed in ancient Egypt across any period of its 3,000-year history. It was an entirely imaginary design, a modern fantasy of what ancient Egyptian royalty looked like, constructed from visual impressions gathered from popular culture, rather than from any actual historical reference. No Egyptian artist from any dynasty in any era would have produced this crown because it did not correspond to any real Egyptian royal symbol at any point in the civilization's existence. The carving was not an Old Kingdom artifact.
It came from the estate of somebody who had a large collection of Egyptian artifacts.
It was not even a convincing reproduction of one. It was a piece of modern stone carving, mounted in a picture frame and presented with a story. Bob Dodge made a single offer on the transaction. $20, not for the carving, but for the wooden frame it was mounted in. Rick laughed and passed entirely. The seller left with an expensive, well-framed piece of modern stonework that would never be worth more than the wood holding it together. The lesson from this entry sits alongside the scarab ring as one of the two most important principles the show has ever demonstrated about the antiquities market. Knowing what something actually is matters more than knowing what someone says it is. Number 4. The Mummified Falcon in Season 10. In an episode, the production team, titled with characteristic Las Vegas irreverence as Chumified, a seller walked into the gold and silver with something that stopped conversation before a single word was spoken. A small intact animal mummy, still wrapped in its original linen, exactly as it had been prepared 25 centuries earlier, sealed inside a decorated sarcophagus that had not been disturbed since ancient craftsmen closed it in the Ptolemaic period. Rick Harrison later reflected that walking into a Las Vegas pawn shop to encounter a mummified bird from the ancient world was, even by the considerable standards of his professional experience, a quintessentially Las Vegas moment. He called in Tom Lindgren, co-consulting director of the Natural History Department at Bonham's Auction House in Los Angeles, one of the world's premier institutions for natural history objects and ancient artifacts. Lindgren walked in, studied the wrapping and the sarcophagus carefully, and provided an identification that transformed the object entirely. The bird was a falcon. In ancient Egyptian religion, the falcon was the earthly manifestation of Horus, god of the sky, of kingship, and of divine protection. His worship began before the unification of Egypt around 3100 BCE and continued without interruption through the Greco-Roman period. More than 3,000 years of unbroken devotion to a single deity whose face was a falcon's. Every pharaoh of Egypt was considered the living incarnation of Horus on earth. When a king wore the double crown, he was not simply a political ruler. He was the god made human, the living bridge between the divine world and the mortal one. Falcon mummies were produced throughout the late period.
The wings of the falcon represent heaven. Well, mummification is just a way of preserving something for eternity.
And the Ptolemaic era as votive offerings to Horus at temple complexes across Egypt. Millions were created across the centuries. The vast majority deteriorated or were destroyed. Finding one intact, linen undisturbed, sarcophagus sealed, geometric weaving patterns still clearly visible after 25 centuries, was genuinely significant. Lindgren expressed initial skepticism before reaching any conclusion, noting directly on camera that the market for convincing reproductions in ancient animal mummies had become increasingly sophisticated. But his examination under magnification resolved the question. The wrapping technique, the geometric linen pattern,
Were done, how they were wrapped, how the sarcophagi look. So everything about this mummy.
Sarcophagus construction were all consistent with authentic Ptolemaic period craftsmanship from approximately 2,500 to 2,600 years ago. His valuation came in between $10,000 and $12,000. Rick recognized the rare crossover appeal immediately. History collectors, Egyptian antiquities buyers, and natural history enthusiasts would all compete for an object of this kind, and closed the deal without hesitation. A mummified representative of the god whose identity the pharaoh wore. Still sealed, still wrapped, bought, authenticated, and displayed in Las Vegas. There is no more American sentence than that one. Number 3. Ancient Greek Hellenistic helmet. The ancient world's definition of a crown was never limited to Egypt. Across the Mediterranean, a different kind of royal status symbol announced a warrior's rank, one forged in bronze and tested on actual battlefields rather than displayed in palace corridors. For the warriors of the Hellenistic period, the 3 centuries following Alexander, the Great's conquest of the known world, a bronze combat helmet was as much a statement of power, identity, and social position as any royal diadem worn by the kings Alexander's successors became. Rick Harrison examined several ancient helmets over the course of the show's run, but the Hellenistic bronze helmet, brought in by a private collector, stands as one of the most technically instructive moments the show has ever produced around the authentication of ancient Mediterranean arms. The seller was asking $12,000. Rick was highly skeptical before the expert even arrived, not because the piece looked wrong, but because he knew exactly what the problem was before anyone else said a word. Ancient bronze armor is among the most consistently and skillfully faked categories in the entire antiquities market. The reason is chemistry. And it is a chemistry that is straightforward enough that determined modern metalworkers exploit it routinely. To produce a convincing fake bronze helmet, a craftsman takes a newly cast piece and treats it with chemical acids to simulate the green patina, the verdigris, that develops naturally on copper alloy objects over centuries of burial in soil. When done skillfully by an experienced hand, the result can appear convincing to a casual observer and even to an untrained eye that has not spent years learning the specific visual and textural differences between genuine ancient patina and its modern chemical imitation. What it cannot fool is a trained specialist who understands at the microscopic level how genuine patina forms over centuries.
We have an ancient Greek bronze helmet, and it's got this rich olive green patina.
The antiquities expert Rick called in gave the helmet a thorough physical examination, studying the patina in both natural and raking light, checking the structural oxidation patterns at the edges and seams, assessing the construction technique and the tool marks on the interior surface. His conclusion was that the piece was authentic. A genuine Hellenistic period bronze combat helmet dating back more than 2,300 years, placing it squarely in the era of Alexander's successors, the Diadochi, whose battles for control of the empire Alexander built shaped the political history of the Mediterranean world for generations.
The Mediterranean becomes a superhighway, connecting cultures that will shape the modern world.
The helmet fit within the broader tradition of Greek defensive armor that evolved from the fully enclosed Corinthian style toward the more open-faced designs that dominated the armies of the Hellenistic kingdoms. There was one factor that complicated the valuation significantly. The nose guard on the helmet had been restored. A section of original metal had been replaced or reinforced with later material at some point in the object's post-ancient history. For serious collectors of ancient bronzes, restoration lowers value considerably because it introduces non-original material into an object whose value rests entirely on its authenticity. The expert placed the valuation at $7,000 to $8,000, and Rick pushed hard on the restoration issue throughout the negotiation. The deal closed at $6,500. One of the oldest battlefield status symbols in the show's history, still carrying the marks of a world that existed more than 2,000 years before anyone built the casino visible from the gold and silver's front. Door number 2. 18th Dynasty mummy mask. In season 13, a seller named Jad walked into the gold and silver carrying an Egyptian cartonnage mummy mask and asking $70,000. Cartonnage was the material ancient Egyptian craftsmen used to construct funeral masks, a layered composite of linen, papyrus, and plaster, shaped around a mold, then painted and decorated to represent the face and upper body of the specific person the mask was made to protect for eternity. Jad said the mask dated to the 2nd century of the Common Era, the Romano-Egyptian period, when Greek and Roman cultural influence had blended with 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian burial tradition to produce some of the most visually arresting funeral objects the ancient world ever created. He had owned the piece for years and felt the time had come to pass it on. Corey Harrison called in antiquities expert Dr. Phineas Castle, who arrived, studied the mask, and observed immediately that somewhere in Egypt, a mummy was missing its face.
So, I mean, this is it.
Look at that. Some mummy's missing its mask.
Castle authenticated the cartonnage construction, verified the polychrome painting, and assessed the preservation as impeccable for an object approaching 2,000 years of age. Then he turned the mask over. On the reverse, the deceased was depicted resting on the back of a lion, a motif in Egyptian funerary art reserved exclusively for individuals of royal or near-royal standing. It was a status declaration embedded permanently into the burial equipment, stating clearly that the person this mask was built to protect had held serious power during their lifetime. Then Castle returned to the front face and identified the crown depicted on the figure's head, the hedje, the white conical crown of Upper Egypt. The hedge was one of the two foundational symbols of pharaonic sovereignty. Combined with the red deshret crown of Lower Egypt, it formed the pshent. The double crown of all Egypt, the most universally recognized symbol of pharaonic authority across the entire span of Egyptian civilization. Having the hedjet on a mummy mask was, in Castle's professional judgment, near certain evidence that this was the burial mask of a royal priestess or a queen, someone whose connection to the divine kingship of Egypt was explicit enough that the craftsman preparing her funeral equipment chose to crown her image with the sovereign, symbol of pharaonic power itself. Castle flagged one market complication directly on camera. A piece of this nature genuinely belonged in a museum, and finding a private buyer willing to pay its true worth would be extremely difficult.
If I can't get 30, I'm just gonna have to probably walk away. I've had offers, so I can.
I'll go 22.
That market reality brought the practical valuation down to $20,000 to $22,000, despite the object's extraordinary historical significance. Jad had asked for $70,000. He held firm for a considerable time. Corey pushed back hard, nearly allowed Jad to walk out entirely, then changed position at the last moment and agreed to $30,000. The mask joined the gold and silver's collection with the crown of Upper Egypt painted permanently across its face. In terms of the specific royal symbol it carries, the sovereign crown of an Egyptian queen, it is the closest the show has ever come to placing a genuine pharaonic crown behind glass on Las Vegas Boulevard, not a reproduction. A burial object made 2,000 years ago to protect the face of a woman who wore a queen's crown in life. Number 1. Ida McKinley's diamond tiara. In Season 8, a seller walked into the gold and silver with a Victorian-era platinum and diamond tiara, a formerly.
Guy brought in a diamond tiara that belonged to First Lady Ida McKinley. He thinks it's worth $75,000.
Documented piece confirmed by official White House photographs as the tiara worn by Ida Saxton McKinley, First Lady of the United States from 1897 until President McKinley's assassination in 1901. The seller was asking $75,000. Before anyone else spoke, Rick ran the math. Strip out every gram of platinum and every diamond, sell all of it at commodity prices, scrap value comes to approximately $7,000. Every single dollar above that figure rested entirely on one concept: provenance. The documented, verified history of exactly who owned this object, when they owned it, and what they did while wearing it in front of the world. The tiara's engineering was immediately impressive. The diamond wings flanking the platinum band were fully detachable, removable and wearable separately as individual brooches, giving the piece 3 distinct configurations and tripling its functional versatility. That level of Gilded Age craftsmanship was the signature of a jeweler serving America's wealthiest families. People who understood jewelry as artistic achievement, financial instrument, and political statement all at once. Rick called in Greg, a specialist in historical jewelry and American presidential memorabilia, to verify whether the documentation was solid enough to justify the conversation. Greg authenticated the construction, tested the detachable mechanism, and reviewed the White House photographs showing Ida McKinley wearing this exact piece at documented state occasions. His verdict was unambiguous. Provenance fully verified, every dollar of the $75,000 asking price supported. Rick opened at $35,000. The seller held firm. No deal that day. The seller returned for a second negotiation, and Rick committed $43,000, the largest single payment he had made on a personal jewelry piece that entire season. Then the transaction became something no viewer had anticipated. Rick Harrison has lived with epilepsy since childhood. Ida McKinley was one of the most publicly recognized epilepsy sufferers of the 19th century. Her condition significant enough that President McKinley developed a personal protocol for managing her seizures at formal state dinners, briefly covering her face with a handkerchief so she could recover in front of foreign dignitaries and the press. Growing up with the same diagnosis, Rick had known Ida McKinley's name his entire life. Her story was part of his own. Instead of marking the tiara up for profit, he contacted the McKinley Presidential Library and Museum in Canton, Ohio, and offered to sell it at exactly his cost. $43,000. No markup, no margin.
History Channel show Pawn Stars. The store's co-owner offered to sell the diamond-accented headpiece to the McKinley Presidential Library and Museum.
The museum raised the funds through a public campaign drawing donations from 22 states, received the tiara, and placed it on permanent display in the McKinley Gallery, where it remains today. Rick donated the proceeds to the Epilepsy Foundation in Ida McKinley's name. $32,000 in available profit, left entirely on the table. 7 objects. 7 moments when history walked through an ordinary door in Las Vegas. A warrior's helmet nearly thrown away at an estate sale. A ring that proved authentic means nothing without rare. A fake that confirmed knowing what something is matters more than what someone says it is. A sealed falcon mummified for the god of kings. A Greek battle helmet from Alexander's world. A queen's burial mask crowned with the sovereign symbol of Egypt. And a tiara connected to a first lady through something money cannot touch. Real value is not always visible at first glance. Hit like, drop a comment, which surprised you most, and subscribe right now.